Okay, so welcome to the continuing East-West Psychology lecture series, Metamorphosis. Um, I am going to be your host today. I'm Jonathan Kay. I'm a PhD student and also a co-host of the East-West Psychology podcast. And we are very excited to present Olena Provencher, who's a PCC PhD. And the title of the talk that Olena will be giving is The Mandala as an archetypal structure in the works of art. And I'll read a little bit about Olena before we get going, before I hand it over to you, Olena. So Olena is a teacher, philosopher, depth psychologist, art history scholar, and artist. Born in Moscow, Russia in 1967, Olena studied at the Moscow State Pedagogical University with a double major in painting and art history. In her master's thesis, she explored the idea of the mandala as the archetypal structure at the foundation of ancient artworks. After graduation, she worked as a senior lecturer at the Moscow Academy of Teachers Training and Retraining, and a middle school art teacher while studying Russian philosophy and sociology, in the Academy's Candidate of Science program until her immigration to the United States in 1999. She received her master's in philosophy from the University of North Florida and a doctorate in philosophy and religion with a concentration in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness from California Institute of Integral Studies. In her ongoing research, she works at the crossfield of art history and Jungian analytical psychology. Olena lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband and younger son. And so welcome, Olena.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I am extremely honored to be invited to the Metamorphosis lecture series and very happy to see all of you here. It is a very exciting moment for me as today I get to present my lifelong work to you. Of course, what I share today is only a brief introduction, and the subject requires much more time in order to go deeper in each artwork than this 1 hour format allows. Let us begin this shorter journey together. The mandala is a multivalent archetypal image, and my approach to it, a spatial approach, looks into one of virtually endless layers of its meaning. Carl Jung, on whom I lean the most in my research, uses the words mandala and quaternity as interchanging, even though the first term, borrowed from Hindu culture, means an elaborate and colorful piece of art based on the quaternity, is opposed to the quaternity proper, which is a plain geometrical structure. I use the word quaternity only when I'm sorry, I use the word mandala only when the word quaternity doesn't seem to work. So before we move to the discussion of art pieces I've chosen for this talk, let us briefly define this spatial approach to the mandala. We humans live in a world that seems to have navigational coordinates built into it, namely top, bottom, left, right, and ahead, behind. We wake up to such a world every morning and generally take it for granted. It is this familiar world with the sky above us, with the earth below us, and us, or me, being in the center of this system of coordinates. there is a notion in the modern and postmodern thought that our ancestors did not experience the world as extended into depth. So they did not have the ahead-behind axis. In the present world picture, with its 6 directions and 3 dimensions, did not establish until the 15th to the 16th centuries. At least this is how things seem to be in Western culture, as it seems. It helps to know that apparently, originally, humans perceived space and the directions within it as qualitative, each cardinal direction having its own unique and special characteristics. Now I'm going to share the screen in order for us to move to the artworks. The title slide that we can see is basically here for the visual references to the meaning, archetypal meaning of the coordinate points of the mandala. So back to the meaning of these cardinal points. The top seem to be associated with spirit, heaven, gods or God, lordship, exaltation, magnificence, reward, blessing, grace, triumph, ascension, day, noon, north, light, truth, clarity, all-knowing, superiority, fire element. At the bottom is associated with matter, underworld, elemental beings, submissiveness, humiliation, inferiority, fall, defeat, suffering, trial, rest, south, midnight, darkness, chaos, earth, primitivity, the human world. Left, inner, yin of the Taoist tradition, the unconscious, the hidden, the past, the collective, receptive, containing, gestation, threshold, transformation, oblivion and dissolution, the ancestral, the perinatal, the Edenic and the primal, nourishing, autumn, evening, west, interiority, introversion, the implicit, the protective, bad, sinister, permanency. Right, outer, young, the conscious, future, the revealed, agency, birth, the concrete and the explicit, beginning, confrontation, life, manifestation, crystallization, east, morning, spring, reason, good, righteousness, extraversion, physical might, progress, and transience. Center, oneness, transcendence, the source, prima materia, the ultimate goal, the omega point, conjunctio oppositorum, or conjunction of the opposites, convergence, sacred marriage, heart, ultimate mystery, absolute luminosity, the ineffable, self-awareness, the individuated one, face to face. Or briefly, the top coordinate seem to be associated. So briefly, we can associate the top with spirit, bottom with matter, left with the inner, and right with the outer. The world for our ancestors was like a mandala of sorts, apparently, a grand circle with a cross within. The structure was imagined as an archetypal skeleton of the whole cosmos, order as opposed to the chaos. Jung writes, quote, "The quaternity is an organizing schema par excellence, something like the crossed threads in a telescope. It is a system of coordinates that is used almost instinctively for dividing up and arranging a chaotic multiplicity, as when we divide up the visible surface of the earth, the course of the year, or a collection of the individuals into groups, the phases of the moon, the temperaments, elements, colors, and so on," unquote. The quaternity can be seen as an archetypal system of qualitative directions or coordinates. Since our consciousness of the world is situated within this system and seems to be inseparable from it, it seems safe to allow that the same system of qualitative coordinates would be unconsciously projected into the works of art by virtue of our world perception having top, bottom, left, right. The art pieces we produce will also carry this top, bottom, left, right structure, imbued with the same archetypal qualities. We also should remember that for Jung, the mandala is an ordering which has a potent healing quality, a healing circle. The structuring of the images along the archetypal coordinates of the quaternity is unconscious for the author for the most part, showing how the unconscious drives the creative artistic process. The last theoretical point that I need to make here is that for Jung, the quaternity is one of the symbols of the self, the numinous wholeness, or our true or larger than ego identity, indistinguishable, according to Jung, from the imago Dei, from the image of God. Jung often cites a medieval maxim: God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Then, since we established that in artworks, as long as they at all relate to space, there is an intrinsic archetypal top, bottom, left, right, center meaning structure. Art may possess a numinous dimension. The mandala or quaternity then can be that skeleton key that opens and illuminates this deeper archetypal meaning and luminosity, going beyond simply historical data and personal story of the artist. Or sometimes we don't even have this personal story of the artist, and not much for a cultural context, as in the case with very, very old art pieces. Then this archetypal mandala approach can be even more invaluable in our understanding of the art piece. Let us now see how these theoretical points can be applied to art analysis. The next slide, please. Our first piece is, thank you, the Venus of Willendorf, belonging to the Upper Paleolithic, circa 28,000 BCE. It is a small figurine, just over 4 inches tall. First, I want to go briefly over the theories, some of them rather bold, speculating what she may represent. One of the theories suggests that the Venus figurines were sex objects that males fondled on a lonely womanless hunting trips. Another theory says that they were women's self-portraits. It's when I look at myself down, I always see myself much fatter than I actually, hopefully, am. So that was the idea. Yet another theory speculates that a fat woman is the ideal woman since the food was scarce. Another idea suggests that she could be a portrait of a holy priestess who was very valuable and therefore well-fed and idle, so she could gain all this weight. And finally, the last idea that I want to, last theory that I want to bring up today is that she can be an image of the Great Mother, the source, the creatrix. If we carefully look at the figurine, we'll see that it is basically a sphere with added legs without feet and head without the face. We can call her an anthropomorphic, or better, a genomorphic sphere, from the word geno in Greek, a woman. Now it would be easier to apply our mandala vision to the figurine. Just a few geometric measurements would let us see that the center, this very special quintessential coordinate of the mandala, falls within her tummy. That makes us think that she is not simply a well-fed woman, but that she carries meaning within, that she is pregnant, being a vessel of life. The vessel is one of the central universal symbols of the feminine in Jung and Erich Neumann. She could be a symbolic womb, a source of life, a genomorphic womb. Her very detailed vulva is accentuated as a portal of birth. She may be the goddess of birth, the creatrix. But back to her being a round stone. Jung writes that both the sphere and stone are among the primary symbols of the self archetype, the numinous one source. She could be an image of the generative aspect of the self. Even though the main view of the Venus is frontal, she doesn't have a face, as we noted. Instead, her head is adorned with 7 concentric circles, which some scholars associate with the lunar cycle and the 7 planets. We remember that the moon played the primary religious role for early humanity. In spite of the figurine's tiny size, she may be a cosmic feminine figure, an image of totality, a female Homus Maximus, the cosmic human, crowned with cosmic glory. Her lack of face may be pointing at 2 interconnected things: her representing the collective psyche or the collective unconscious, which means that there is no individual focused consciousness, and the image being a forerunner of the idea of the veiled goddess, such as the Greek Artemis and the Egyptian Nis of Sais, who says, "I am all that was, is, and will be. No mortal will ever unveil me. The fruit of my womb was the sun." The one great mystery. The Willendorf's Venus, with her enormous breasts, can carry the same meaning as the multiple small breasts of the sculptures of Artemis of Ephesus, the universal nourisher. The top coordinate of the mandala is associated with heaven or sky, and so is Venus's head. The bottom coordinate is connected to the abyss, underworld, the plutonic realm of suffering. Maybe that is a reason why the feet of this and very many other Venus figurines were broken off, possibly ritualistically, portraying her as the all-good mother. If we continue to relate the archetypal quaternity to the human body, The horizontal axis would be comprised of the arms. Venus's arms are only outlined. They do not extend out from the body, but folded over her large breasts. They are thin and cartoonish, and of no use to her. Not only such a representation seems to portray the Venus as a birth giver, not a maker. It seems that horizontal axis of the quaternity, connected in its meaning with the concept of yin and yang of Taoism, is not fully differentiated yet. The solar masculine is not fully differentiated from the lunar feminine. The birth of the solar hero, the individual consciousness, did not yet happen. The tiny stone genomorphic sphere of the Venus of Willendorf is something of the initial lapis or philosopher's stone, another symbol of the self, the mustard seed out of which the whole creation or the world of consciousness would develop. The Venus of Willendorf does seem to portray the great mother goddess based on our interpretation of her as the world's matrix. Please, this next image. The second work I want to introduce today is the stela Horus on the crocodiles. We can see the crocodiles under his feet right there. And this is the baby newborn Horus in the center. Originated in the 18th dynasty Egypt, it was widely reproduced as it was believed to bring healing and protection. This particular piece is Ptolemaic, of the time of the Greek domination. Now to the main theories about the imagery. It is usually considered as an illustration of the myth of Horus, which goes like this. Isis gives birth to Horus in the marshes of Delta. Baby Horus is bitten by a deadly snake, but magically recovers. In the stela's apotropaic healing qualities are supposedly coming from Horus's depiction on the stela as conquering the vicious and dangerous animals. However, if we look carefully at the stela, we see that not all the animals are vicious towards humans. For instance, this oryx antelope at the left from Horus is a peaceful animal. The imagery seems to conform to the meaning of the cardinal points of the mandala. At the right, we see a lotus flower, which is associated with the sunrise, sun, yang. At the bottom, the crocodiles, the scaly, hard, primitive, cold-blooded animals that fit with the meaning of the bottom coordinate. In the Bible, Leviathan, who is a female crocodile, and the main nemesis of Yahweh, and Yahweh's shadow of sorts, lives in the abyss. At the left, we see a falcon, a creature of the threshold between heaven and earth, or sky and earth, the conscious and the unconscious. And only the top coordinate seems to be off. On the very top, the place of the high god in the mandala, the heaven of the stela, we see Bes. Bes is the character that is usually considered as a very minor household deity. Can Bes then have more importance somehow than a minor god? The very geometrical center of the composition falls on the Amulet Shen. Please, the next slide. Amulet Shen on Horus's neck. It's actually upside down on the image. So this dual part is on top. It is itself a mandala with the meaning of the differentiation of the unity into the duality. Did I mention that the Shen means unity? That's the meaning of that word in Egyptian. So this seems being a main theme of the composition. The old man, Bess, and the young child, the senex and the poor. Bess, this uncharacteristically grotesque image for Egyptian aesthetics, when depicted in full size, I'm sorry, the next image, please, is a tiny dwarf, but his image is near identical to the image of Babylonian Humbaba or Huwawa from the Epic of Gilgamesh, who was the guardian of the forest and an enormous giant. Despite his imagery in the Babylonian art, in the text, Humbaba is said to have the paws of a lion, a body covered with thorny scales, claws of a vulture, horns of a wild bull. He is composed of the animals that seems to be related to the four beings of Ezekiel's vision, whom Jung considered archetypal and related to the four zodiacal constellations as a cosmic quaternity, an image of wholeness and totality. Jung explains the ambivalent or fluctuating size of the Bess-like characters through a peculiar commonality of the archetypes, quote, with the atomic world, which is demonstrating before our eyes that the more deeply the investigator penetrates the universe of microphysics, the more devastating are the explosive forces he finds enchanted there. That the greatest effect comes from the smallest causes has become patently clear, not only in physics, but in the field of psychological research as well, unquote. This seems to particularly apply to the self-archetype, the archetype of the archetypes in the expression of oneness and totality. Both being tiny, smaller than small, and enormous are, according to Jung, the characteristics of the self-archetype, which has an ineffable or paradoxical nature. The dwarf and the giant, as two manifestations of the self, may have a peculiar archetypal relationship with the center and the circumference of the mandalic circle, respectively. After looking carefully at the detached Bess's head on the stela, we can see that it is not really a head of Bess, but his mask. What is it hiding behind? Are there any parallels here with the facelessness of the Venus of Willendorf? The next slide, please. Thank you. If we apply the Egyptian canon of human proportions, we seem to reveal the hidden body of Bess, who then becomes not only the main character of the stela, but also the body of the stela itself, as it were. The animals whom Horus conquers becomes parts of Bess's body, his fingers, his feet, and these animals seem to also correlate to the four zodiacal beings of the fixed cross: Leo, Taurus, Scorpio, Aquarius, or lion, bull, eagle, and the human figure, which would be Horus himself. The Shen amulet becomes Bess's navel, the mythological omphalos, the center of the world. Bess in the stela can be an image of the Deus absconditus, the ineffable, hidden cause behind the phenomena. The masked beast may be a masculine, patriarchal counterpart of the faceless Venus. The next slide, please. Thank you. Joseph Campbell speaks of a process of solarization of religions, the transition from lunar feminine to solar masculine cults. And Jung points out that Bes is often connected to the great goddess in mythology. There is a circular movement in the imagery, a clockwise one. Towards consciousness, according to Jung, or towards the birth of the light, the nascent solar hero, which is up here, considering the image of Horus. The stela may be speaking to us about the cycle of becoming, where the young solar hero is born. He grows, overcomes the four cardinal points of the world's journey as the four main trials, and becomes the old man, who is then being reborn again as a poor. The incantation text on the back of the stela seems to confirm this reading. It opens up with the supplication to the old one who regularly grows young, aged one who becomes a youth. We can conclude that the stela of Horus on the crocodiles is very unlikely a mere illustration of the myth of Horus, but a complex and deeply meaningful composition with its own intrinsic value. This composition is decidedly a mandala, with imagery on all four coordinates. And it is a fully differentiated one, with not only the vertical, but a horizontal axis fully developed. If it then has a real psychological healing and protective qualities, which are not products of the superstitious imagination of the ancient Egyptians. Only it protects not from vicious antelopes and hawks, but rather from the unconscious forces of the psyche that can be destructive to the nascent solar hero, young individual consciousness in early stages of differentiation from the collective unconscious. Here it is necessary to make a little addition, so then we could proceed to our last two pieces. The idea of quaternity is widespread in mythology across cultures. We find it also in two variations in Plato's Timaeus dialogue. The first reference in Timaeus is a primary oneness that constantly brings forth the four foundational qualities of the world, the four elements: earth, air, water, and fire. It is the mother, the nurse of all, the receptacle, how Plato calls it or her. This entity is eternal and indestructible. It predates creation. The other entity that Plato refers to is a more complex one. And Plato calls it the world soul, or in Latin translation, the anima mundi. In Plato, it is the archetypal skeleton of the old cosmos. It can be seen as created in part from the entity we just discussed. First, the receptacle. Jung did not write about the first entity in Plato, but does rather extensively about the anima mundi, confidently classing it as a quaternity. It is, however, a more complex structure consisting of two concentric circles, of two concentric quaternities. This cosmic structure was more than likely known way before Plato. Please, the next slide. This is a rendering of this double two-circle 8-point mandala from the Dendera temple. In such images as this one, and in Plato, the outer circle designates the sphere of the fixed stars, or the celestial equator. In the inner circle, the ecliptic, the circle of the zodiac. Now you may ask, what can it possibly, what has it to do with our subject of art? But we will see this connection in a few moments. We can move to our next piece, and please the next slide, which is the Russian icon, St. George and the Dragon. It was created in the 15th century, but just like in the case of the stela of the Horus on the Crocodiles, this type or this composition existed much earlier. The composition seems to represent the next stage of the solar hero's journey, a grown Horus child, but still beardless. George is connected with Horus, not only archetypally, but also historically. Please, the next slide. We see a similar motif of the hero of light, conquering the primitive part of his own nature, his shadow, the crocodile, the dragon. Only here, polarities acquire a moral quality. They are not just a juxtaposition of equally necessary but different elements, like morning and evening, but ethically charged as good and evil. That strong inner charge of polarities manifests in the swift motion. George in the composition is in a strong movement towards the right, the ego consciousness in Jung. For comparison, the compositions of the Venus and the stela are both hieratic and static, representational. This icon's dynamism also manifests in the explicit use of the diagonals. Such an explicit use of diagonals seems to reveal another, second quaternity. Please, the next slide. A quaternity with the coordinates top right, bottom left, and top left. We now seem to deal with an 8-point structure, since we have top, bottom, left, right, top right, bottom left, and top left. The 8-point structure that seems to be archetypal. After digging through a lot of artworks, I found that the archetypal meaning of the diagonal coordinates seems to be contingent on the classical top, bottom, left, right quaternity, and might be found in combining the meaning of the top and the right coordinates of the mandala for top and the right coordinates for top right, that of left and bottom for bottom left, and so on. If the top coordinate signifies domination, the regal power, the acme of spiritual maturity and creative force, and the right coordinate, consciousness, light, individual self-awareness, the solar principle, then the top right coordinate is a combination of the two, would express the creative and creating power of mature self-awareness or wisdom and the triumph of the light of consciousness. This is where the hand of the ineffable God is usually placed in icons. And here we see it in this cloud or body of glory that is sometimes called this blue-green part of the section of a circle, the God's hand, the Mano Dei. The bottom left coordinate would combine the influences of the bottom, which is matter, the peak of the material, heavy conditions, incarnation, in the left, the hidden, the collective life, the belonging in the dark womb of the unconscious. The bottom left coordinate would then express immaturity, being caught, bound in the primal conditions, the burden of the unconsciousness. This is where the layer of the dragon is in this and many other icons, a seeming opening into the abyss. The geometric center falls on George's foot, which passes the circular motion, seemingly, to the circular or round stirrup. From there, it is passed visually to the horse, which further passes it to other rounded shapes, as if animating all the world around the solar hero. This evokes the Aristotelian vision of the cosmos, filled with a circular motion of the heavenly bodies, which originates by the unmoved mover, which passes it to the celestial equator, the motion, and that passes it on further to the wheel of the zodiac, the ecliptic, with the 7 planets rotating within. It also may be reminiscent of the vision of the clockwork universe that would settle in later. George's head on the icon takes the usual place of the divine at the top coordinate. The solar hero, the individual ego consciousness, seems to misplace or replace the ineffable God. Please, the next slide. The last work of art that I would like to speak today about is this marvelous painting by Pier Matteo d'Amelia, The Annunciation, painted about 1487. It belongs to the European Renaissance. We probably all remember that through the 15th century, art undergoes a rapid transformation. The shadow is now pictured. The portrait establishes as a genre. And possibly for the first, the most striking and dramatic change is possibly the discovery of the spatial depth. Within a tiny space of only 1 century, art transitions from a tremendously long history of 2-dimensional images to depicting space in 3D. The main invention of the 15th century in art is usually considered to be central perspective. The main element of the central perspective is the vanishing point. It is that 0-dimensional dot, smaller than small, where all the orthogonals meet, where all the opposites enter a state of the secret marriage. This is the vanishing point. The unspeakable oneness, the womb of the creation. It is also the source of all the images. It is from this point, this iota, that everything is created. Please, the next slide. To it, everything is related. From it, all the measurements are made and all forms develop. If it is covered by a figure or an object, it is a holy figure like Christ, in the numinous object like a temple. Through the 15th century, the vanishing point is placed in the very middle of the horizon and celebrated as if it was the main, albeit invisible, numinous characters of the artworks. It does look like this revelation in art relates to a process of differentiation within the mandalic structure of the collective psyche, or world soul. Jung wrote about a horizontalization of consciousness happening through the Renaissance that produces the modern mind. Jung describes this horizontalization of consciousness as the intrapsychic process that, quote, in contrast to the Gothic striving upwards to the heights, could be described as the horizontal movement outwards, namely the voyages of discovery and the conquest of nature. The vertical was cut across by the horizontal, unquote. Could we possibly relate this horizontalization to our 8-point mandalic structure that becomes so widespread in images through Middle Ages? If we can, this is, I think, what happened. The next slide, please. Thank you. The vertical axis, top bottom, falls over, top bottom, falls over, rotating 90 degrees. This top bottom axis becomes their here axis of depth. I call this process of the vertical axis swinging into the horizontal plane a projectile collapse. In the spatially unfolded mandala, a bimandala, the value dimension of height transforms into the value of depth. In the process, the top coordinate becomes one with the center coordinate, creating the vanishing point. So the vanishing point would be if this is the spectator standing somewhere looking this way. The vanishing point would be on this line in here, but it coincides with the center too. The meaning of these two coordinates, this center coordinate of the mandala and the former top, now their coordinate, merely blending together, becoming an expression of the divine one, the infinite, reflecting a new imagination of space. Then the foreground would express the former bottom coordinate, Earth, the place of the ego, the background, with its now open to our view horizon, God's world, to borrow Jung's expression, with God's presence revealed in the vanishing point. And the wall that we see in most of the Renaissance compositions, this wall in the middle, a separation between the finite world of the ego and the infinite world of God. Another dimension is added to human consciousness through the Quattrocento, or 15th century. This structure is ubiquitous in Renaissance paintings through the Quattrocento. The vanishing point is overcharged with luminosity, being a paradoxical, invisible image of absolute oneness, the ineffable source, that master seed, that which is smaller than small, but is the most powerful force in the universe. In the Renaissance paintings, space, now three-dimensional, still is not quantitative but qualitative. The closer to us, the more profane. The further from the spectator and the closer to the vanishing point, the more sacred the space becomes. Let us look at the lamentation of Christ, The next slide, please. By Andrea Mantegna, circa 1480. Christ's head, the holiest part of the human body, is merging into the vanishing point. It is the body which he meant in his metaphor of the temple. I will destroy this temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Christ here is the Homus Maximus, the cosmic human, the created universe, the base of the stela of Horus. In the stela, the hidden base gives it its vertical orientation, standing as an erect spirit within. In Mantegna's painting, Christ is lying with his head away from us, as if base incarnationally fell over, giving space its new orientation into depth. In foreshadowing, the death of God announced by Nietzsche and the disenchanted universe. In interesting detail, we already saw an image of the structure of the universe, where the 2 concentric cosmic circles lie in the same plane, then they are around Zodiac. Please, the next slide. Thank you. However, when it came to Plato, he, possibly for the first time in history, describes this cosmic structure, the anima mundi, as the 3-dimensional structure, where these 2 circles are set at the 90 degrees in relation to one another. It is an archetypal image, of course. These 2 concentric circles in Plato's vision seem to foreshadow the later Renaissance collective 3-dimensional vision or perception of space. On the next slide, please. A few words about the wall in the painting that separates the newly born foreground and the background. So we're talking about this wall that is absolutely a constant presence in most, if not all, Quattrocento paintings. It does seem that this wall always existed in works of art before, being one with the plane of the imagery. The archetypal images were projected on it, similarly to the images projected on the wall of the Platonic cave, in the allegory of the cave in the Republic dialogue. Again, if we look at ancient images, beginning with cave paintings, they are usually shown the way where the form or shape is recognized the easiest, as if they were shadows. The imagery only had one plane, coinciding with the plane of the wall, whether it was a wall of a cave or later a temple. Many Russian religious philosophers and art historians derive separate artworks, such as icons, from art painted on walls of the temple. This wall is possibly an archetypal reference to the cosmic womb, within which the artist experienced her existence. The wall of the womb, the opaque womb of the collective psyche, of the cosmic mother. This wall evokes the Venus of Willendorf as a goddess womb. In Renaissance art, 2 worlds extend from this wall in opposite directions: the foreground and the background. The foreground is usually a man-made space. It's usually part of a house. And usually it shows, the painting would show the floor, which is made out of these beautiful squares that sometimes are black and white. The foreground is a place where the action happens, where the characters are present. In psychological terms, this space seems to correspond to the conscious or the world of the ego. The background extending behind from the wall into depth is a world of gorgeous ideal nature in Quattrocento paintings, like Eden. It seems to be an image of the unconscious. Jung once wrote that the collective unconscious is simply nature. A side note, such a division existed in pre-Renaissance art too, only all the time before the Renaissance, it was along the vertical axis of the art piece. The spiritual world belongs to the top zone, the soul to the middle register, and the earthly to the bottom zone, as we know from the meaning of the mandala coordinates. As we said earlier, the wall between these two spaces can be a depiction of the threshold between the human and the divine worlds. So, during the Quattrocento, this wall, for the first time in history, acquires windows and becomes transparent to ordinary humans. The mystical vision of oneness, of the source, is now available to ordinary people, to humans still living, to the human daytime consciousness. It is as if the veil of the great mother goddess was finally lifted. The imagery of Pier Matteo's painting from the mandala perspective could be read as something like this. Mary and Gabriel in the foreground play out an eternal archetypal event of the sacred marriage between the yin and yang polarities, which simultaneously means the conception of the solar hero, the dying and resurrecting God, the light of consciousness, within the maternal womb of the universal mother. The spectator is now liberated from this womb, out of the Platonic cave, and can see it from a distance as a center of creation, the vanishing point. The spectator is now able to see into the infinite, into their own larger cosmic identity, the source existing in the infinite. The painting then seems to visualize the process of individuation. In the next image, please, our last one. This is our final image that sums up the stages of evolution of the mandala structure or quaternity through the evolution of consciousness we just discussed is reflected in art. I have much more to say, but I think it's it for tonight.
Thank you so much. The presentation can go on. Yes, absolutely.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. It's amazing.
Thank you so much for coming. I really, really appreciate it.
So happy. I feel honored to.
Oh yeah.
To you. It's yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you know, Olena, we were talking in when we were doing our podcast about the importance of, in our lives anyway, art as being a central way of thinking about individuation and about culture, and it's just so, I think it's so such an important perspective that, you know, I think it enriches our CIS, the kind of the academic milieu, and I think this is a really amazing way of engaging with art history, but in a way that doesn't kind of just kind of repeat the classical image of what art is and what it is supposed to do or what it means. And I think that's where it's like, to me, it's so inspiring, because it's really like you're opening up these artworks for us in a way that is not telling us this is what it means and this is, you know, in a sort of like giving us an image of thought or giving us a pre-made version of what it is. You're asking us, well, what can this do, and how does it lead? How can it lead to transformation, and how may it have led to transformation, like individuation in the people that were producing it and interacting with it? And And the other thing that that's very profound and super important when we think about something like these pieces of let's say individual and shared collective expressions of individuation and collective individuation, but like that opening to the cosmic, you know. And I think that's really that like psychocosmology is really something that especially in East-West psychology, I think is a really important piece in bridging the East and the West for sure, but also I mean, bridging into PCC and a lot of the topics that both of our departments are kind of specializing in. It's not a metaphysics for the sake of metaphysics. It's not a psychology for the sake of psychology. It's like it's a way of trying to interact with what is beyond, with the cosmos, with the idea of an evolutionary kind of an evolutionary vanishing point, if you will, which you brought up a lot. So these are some of the main kind of thoughts that are just so inspiring when approaching these pieces of art. Maybe we can open it up. I mean, we have Jean-Michel and Lila here. Is there any questions you want to ask Olena at this point? Please.
I have a question. In music, there has been a departure of a structure that was also based on the quaternity with do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, and that was broken in contemporary slowly after, you know, Alban Berg, and they start to create other systems, and then atonality, which is completely apart from that. And there was a coincidence with that with the precipitation of materialism. So the departure of this structure was also, so my question is, do you find those structures in contemporary art, or has there been a break from it that coincides with the materialist philosophy that is most prevalent in the modern world?
Thank you. It's a very rich question, very interesting. In art, so one of the core ideas in my research is that this structure, the quaternity, it actually never goes anywhere. So when we made this giant leap from pre-Renaissance art, which is millennia and millennia, to something that happens basically like yesterday. You know, it's Renaissance, it's yesterday, it's what, 15th century. Nothing, right, from us. So what happens, it's not that the vertical quaternity, but I was saying that it kind of swings in this horizontal plane, right, that vertical axis. It's not like its vertical axis disappears. What is happening is that the imagery is not there anymore. The top coordinate becomes devalued. So it's still there, and it still has the potential, this archetypal potential. You know how archetypes, the word in Latin, translated from Plato's word idea, is the form. So it's a form, it's archetypal force or power that is waiting to be filled with concrete images, concrete meaning, right? Because otherwise it's sort of abstract. It lives there waiting to be filled. So what happens through Renaissance, the top coordinate and the bottom coordinate, they become emptied of imagery. So they only remain as potentials after that. Because you don't see, like, okay, in Middle Ages, for instance, we would often see some sign or symbol of God, maybe a white dove on the very top of the painting, right? And it doesn't appeal to Renaissance imagination, because the interest is in the vast stretches to the horizon. It's out there. It's the, as Jung said, voyages of discovery. So the interest is in looking in depth or in the infinite. So a very similar thing is happening further, I think, is that certain coordinates are simply emptied of meaning, but they potentially present. So for instance, when we look at, and again, it's a gorgeous, very interesting subject for me. If we look at abstracts, for instance, right, which come in early 20th century, it looks like we cannot ever analyze a painting like that by applying this mandala or quaternity grid to it. It doesn't make sense. But then actually you can, because even though there is no objects on the coordinates and no objects whatsoever, but there are still associations, and there is often geometrical shapes used, right, in abstracts. So geometrical shapes, they are basically archetypes. So it even in a way, it's even easier to see. I unfortunately don't have the time and the capability right now, but it's I actually do have an image in the presentation. We had a really bad problem, as you noticed with it, and thank you, Jonathan, for saving the day with the presentation. But it sometimes it's even easier to see what geometrical shapes are. They bigger? Are they darker in color? Where are they? On the bottom? Okay, well, so that's the accent then on the bottom of this abstract composition. Or what is in the center? So the same principle would apply anywhere. So one point I wanted to make answering your question is that so there is this opinion in some scholars that supposedly, that's what Jung would say, supposedly our early ancestors knew all these things and we simply forgot. So for us, it all works the same as it is. All this quaternity, archetypal meaning, it's there, but we simply are unaware of it completely.
Yes, okay, that's kind of amazing. I don't know if I can ask another question that is connected to that. From what I understood, tell me if I'm wrong. The creative art then would be somehow an actualization of the deep structure of the psyche. And here in Brazil, there was a very important disciple of Jung, Nisi da Silveira. I don't know if you know her. She worked with a very heavy cases of psychotic people in her institute, and she was using art therapy, and she could identify mandalas in the patients and it was very healing for them. So I guess my question is, what is your experience with the production? Have you worked with the production of psychotic people and the entire process of bringing those structures into those potential structures into reality? Because it seems to be very healing, and I think what you're doing explains why.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I completely agree with you with the beginning of your ruminations. I perceive the mandala exactly the same way. And well, we know that Jung considered mandalas is appearing spontaneously in scribbles even of people who have a chaos at the moment, psychological, in a state of chaos. It can be like the dark night of the soul. It can be all this hard, heavy, depressed states where the consciousness, which in Jung possesses the sort of opposite complementary character to the conscious. So if the conscious is depressed and in a dark state, then the soul, the psyche, tries to give us the image of wholeness to counterbalance that depression. So the images, healing images, very often appear in the scribbles of suffering, depressed people. That's what Jung noticed in his patients. My own experience, that very first image in the presentation, which was the title image. This is my own mandala. I work with mandalas too, and I often create mandalas for people at some, threshold experiences, threshold moments in their life that may be experienced as stepping in the unconscious, stepping in the unknown, which is, we all have our inertia, we're afraid of this. And we also have the pull often of this unknown. So PCC program, I know a lot of people have my mandalas as friends. So I know the stories where I had a feedback on the mandalas, and then people did say that it was experienced as healing. And I am very far from bragging. I never sign my mandalas. I don't put my signature on them because I never experience mandalas as my own creations. I feel that they come through me, and I only simply lend my skill, my hand, tools that I use for it. But the image comes when I concentrate on a certain person, when I want to bring healing to a person.
It's amazing.
It is amazing for me, this work with mandala, it's so magical. I work with mandala for many years, and I always am amazed. It's always something, every time I touch on it, there's always some little miracle there. And the whole atmosphere around this work is absolutely amazing. I love it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I really don't have much to say. I work with mandalas myself.
Oh, wonderful.
So everything you're saying, I'm like, yes. Yes. In the dark night of my soul is when I really started working with them a lot and studying them and painting them. And my background's in art. My undergrad is in art. I've been an art teacher for a long time. So when I heard that you were going to do this, I was very excited. So I came in a little late. I was so bummed. I was late. I left an appointment really late, but thank you so much for your work. And I want to see your dissertation. How can Jonathan, will you be able to send it to me? Is that okay? I would love to see it.
Yeah, as would I. I think it's on ProQuest. Is that what it's called?
It's on ProQuest.
Yeah, let's I'll find that link and I can send it to you. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so we have the same exactly background. It's amazing. I don't know if there are any questions, but I just wanted to make a remark in connection to what Jonathan said. It was very interesting what he said. He was talking about many things, but also, Jonathan, you said something about the connection with the cosmos, of the subject with the cosmos. So I also tried to have this thread through my talk today, where I try to connect art with cosmos. So it's macrocosm and microcosm, right? And I just want to say that. It just feels like it wants to come through me. Otherwise, my talk would be incomplete. That's how it feels. So we know that this revolution that the Western world experiences, starting from sometime late 14th century and on, also later reflects in the discovery of the heliocentric system. And we know that initially it was only a few people who sort of woke up to this vision, a completely different vision than it was before. And they were in correspondence with each other, sort of like, we know how things really are. It's only a few of us, but we know. And so there was this luminous atmosphere around this discovery. So they felt like initiates, literally. And I want to read a little quote from Kepler, how Kepler expresses his feelings towards his discovery. It feels to me that it's very much correlating with what happened in art a little bit earlier. It seems to, how vision in Plato considered the main, well, at least in Plato, our main sense. So somehow it may be partly true, at least, because yes, this revolution first happens in art, actually, which is, has to do with vision. So Kepler writes, now nothing holds me back. I yield freely to the sacred frenzy. I dare frankly to confess that I have stolen the golden vessels of the Egyptians to build a tabernacle for my God, far from the bounds of Egypt. The die is cast, and I'm writing a book to be read either now or by posterity. It matters not. It can wait a century for a reader, as God himself has waited 6,000 years for a witness. So this is how Kepler feels about this discovery. And this is, I believe, how first Renaissance artists who actually were instrumental in discovering the central perspective as opposed to earlier experiments, how they felt about this new vision. I also remember this anecdote story about Paolo Uccello, one of the monumental Quattrocento painters. The anecdote goes like this. Paolo is in his studio. It's very late, and he is still painting in communion with his unfinished painting. So his wife is coming and desperately begging him to please come back to the marital bed because it's late. And he is very distractedly still looking at his painting, says, yes, but how incredibly sweet perspective is.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's the change of an epoch. That's exactly what it is. It's something, being revealed itself in a different way, a different technology of seeing and knowing. I mean, it's unbelievable to consider these moments in history. I mean, even the going back, to cave paintings, the idea of that moment in time, and the meaning that, like, maybe not the meaning, but what happened as that was being inscribed, and how culture started developing into and sort of structuring itself and developing. And like, I found it interesting. I was reading a little bit from Bernard Stiegler, who's a contemporary French philosopher. He's a philosopher generally of individuation, and of techniques in a way. Like that's, he's coming out of Gilbert Simondon, who was a philosopher of technology and techniques, and but he's calling artworks social sculpture, because part of the way that he sees individuation is that it's never individual. It's always individual and collective, because individual doesn't exist without a collective. A collective doesn't exist, and a collective is not just a bunch of separate individuals. He's sort of challenging the kind of liberal notion of this autonomous sovereign subject, the cogito, as being something that can stand back from the cosmos and dispassionately understand and see things. So he's really embedding the notion of the individuation with trans-individuation, which is like collective. It's more than it's collective individuation, but it's both of those coming together and then the idea of cosmogenesis or ontogenesis, right? And so there's a very cosmic, a cosmogenesis. He's taking that idea of individuation from the top to the bottom, from the cosmic all the way to life, molecular life, to matter, right? But that idea of social sculpture is very interesting, and that's where I think that you were bringing that out in how you were talking about these artworks, in terms of, I think, just in a way that was able to talk about how epochs and how culture is going to be changing according to to the coordinates of how you can know yourself, how you can know collectives, and I think that artwork is central to that.
Yeah, if I
Mhm.
may,
Please.
exactly. It's we have very developed studies in our school in all directions. Art seems to be a complementary discipline. When you work with art pieces, you still can, of course, but it's seems to me harder to, as you touched on it before, to impose your own reading. It feels that the art would correct you in a way, because you cannot really load it with your own reading, and it would hold it. No, it's just not really that possible. So it feels to me that it's very helpful when you can. It's one thing to study the theories about evolution of consciousness, but it's so exciting to actually see it. And also something that you very geniusly touched on, actually, I wanted to kind of follow on this, is that we talked in this conversation today, we talked about basically revolutions within evolution of consciousness. The leaps, the changes when things would acquire some different angle completely from what was before. I was thinking that we are, as a society, as a humanity, we are at this type of point right now. We also, many of us feel that what was happening in the society, what was happening in many parts of culture, is not sustainable anymore, or it's not reflecting us, the changing world, anymore. Most of us, I think, if I can feel that things are changing drastically. We don't know what things are going to be, but we may speculate, and we need to speculate about it. And so I was thinking, it would be very interesting to have a conversation looking into art and trying to draw out the perspectives for the future. Maybe they would help us to see with our eyes what is going to happen within the psyche.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I had a question, and I think it's just responding to this, and looking at our present times, for sure. How do we interact with art? But thinking a little bit about, you were this perspectivalism, right? This change of epoch in a way. Like, what was coming into my mind was how at that moment, and from within modernity itself, the technologies that have, that industrialization and whatnot, and all of the ways in which kind of modernity has kind of come forth and given rise to how we know ourselves, people who are within that container. But one of the themes is this spatialization of time. And so this perspectival, this perspectivism, in a way, that's what, when I was seeing those images, it was interesting, because that was the idea of, like, we are able to now, within a artistic image, spatialize time in a visual sense, And that also goes into the technologies of industrialization and things like that. And I guess I wanted to just ask you about that in terms of the mandala as being more of a chronotope. I mean, the idea that it's not perspectival, and so how you would read a mandala is not, you know, I guess you could, in a way, it's open to interpretation of how things are going to unfold in time. Like that's what, you know, like you see us like we were, you know, Jean-Michel, we were studying the idea of the chronotope in, you know, Ajanta caves, for instance, where the whole like Buddha's life's stories are depicted all in one kind of in one big scene, you know. And it's sort of it's almost like an eternal image that happens all at the same time, you know. And you can kind of, there's maybe more of an interpretation to how you are going to interact with that scene in terms of its actualization through, let's say, a psychocosmological, in a psychocosmological way, you know. And I guess that's what the mandala seems to me. And if I could just elaborate a little bit, because music was brought up, and, you know, being a musician, I can't help myself here, but I felt like when I went to India and I started learning raga music, I just did a talk a couple days ago about raga music as a yantra or as a mandala. A raga is like that. It has a center point. It has, you know, a certain coordinates in a way. You could, the model works perfectly well with music. And Jean-Michel, you brought up, you know, Western music, and even Western music going into serialism and the contemporary form that were like atonal music, which is saying we are going to take the coordinates. We're going to do our best to take the coordinates out completely and shatter the coordinates. We don't want these coordinates anymore. The grounding, or that that point, you know, the point that's going to give you a certain way of ordering its elements, right? And so I guess that's just the mandala. I just feel that it is very holistic. It brings you to that, it brings you to a place that is, like you said, is always vanishing. It's something that is yet to be attained. It's almost a point of utopia, because you are constantly opening to how it can become different, because it's you know. And in the sense of raga music feeling like that circularity with a center that's constantly vanishing, whereas Western music, if I'm thinking classical music, for instance, but it happens in, again, a very linear sense. It's you know, if you think about Bach or Beethoven, it's like there's a theme, there's a variation, there's a key change, it takes you to the bridge, you know, it takes you, music works like that. And you can think about how, and you can analyze how it comes back to the theme, you know, maybe in a different key or whatever, but it still seems to privilege that idea of spatializing time in a very linear sense. And I guess these are just some thoughts here, but it seems like you said, a very drastic difference, but with the spatialization of time and that perspectival point, there can also be giving that point, like you were saying, the more sacred, what was this quote? The more sacred time. Oh yeah. The more sacred it becomes as it gets closer to the vanishing point. Fascinating idea. But what happens when you don't actually allow, or you don't want you don't allow that vanishing point to be an infinity, but you actually impose, you know, it becomes a hegemony of sorts, right? You can say, well, I'll give you what is a vanishing point, but I'm going to determine what that vanishing point is. It's not infinity, because I need, as a ruler, or can, you know, as a you know, somebody who is looking to order and to create subject a certain way, you're going to give that as a transcendental given, you know. And so that's just, I guess now I've sort of gone into, that's a danger, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that idea of the vanishing point, you know, it brings up Gepser, it brings up, you know, Sri Aurobindo's integral, Gepser's integral, but also historically how that can also be taken from people, and that perspectivism, it's sort of like it can, it can become a new verticality, because you're talking about the horizontally, right? You're going, but it can become just another logocentrism in that sense, you know. And that was just another thought that came to my mind as like a critique of how in the European tradition of, you know, finding this perspectivism, how it also can be embedded within a certain kind of hegemonic framing, you know, a logocentric framing. And music, there's an analysis that goes along with music in a similar sense, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. This is fascinating. And Gebser was always very interesting to me. I actually really love him. He was very helpful, instrumental actually to this developing of this, you know, story that I presented. You mentioned if so many interesting, like what you said, you know, I could take many directions from what you said. It's fascinating. The subjects that you brought up, really fascinating. Where I want to take it, because we don't have, you know, unfortunately, all time in the world. Where I want to take it is that there's a couple things that three things that I want to say. First of all, when we just like, we're not going to talk about it right now about the time aspect, but we just look at the classical mandala, top, bottom, left, right, or quaternity. So what is interesting is that when we address the archetypal meaning of the coordinates, when we look at the top, for instance, top is associated with certain archetypal qualities like rulership, like the divine, heaven, Eden, but it also relates to north, and it also relates to winter and noon. The right coordinate relates to spring, relates to east, sunrise, relates to also has many other archetypal qualities like the beginning, the young, the birth, and so on and so on. So we can finish the circle. So as we can see, this structure is space-time structure. It is both space and time, in addition to many other things. So apparently for our ancestors, it was space-time. It was not as for us, the moderns, time is differentiated, and we can somehow speculate that it's a separate coordinate. I don't think it is, but this is not my field of study. So the mandala teaches us that actually it is a space-time. And what is fascinating to me, one of the sort of effects that I ended up is that when I think about my surroundings as a mandala, so, you know, I mentioned it in the beginning that every morning when I open my eyes, I sort of create somehow unconsciously this, it's not even quaternity because we are modern people. It's 6 directions. It's top, bottom, left, right, ahead, behind. And this is sort of the ordering of my, it's the structure underlying my consciousness. It's not actually present in my consciousness, but it really is there to create everything else, the field of my awareness, right? Ordered field of my awareness. So once I become conscious of this, I become an observer, and I cannot pull myself completely out, of course, but I also can acquire the point of view of the observer, where I have both. I am involved in it. I'm part of it. I'm in the ego consciousness, but I also know of it. So I am an observer who can look at it and say, well, but there can be different points of view. There can be different perception. That is not where you're not crucified on the cross of these directions when you are free. You know, this was absolutely fascinating gain from this work. And another something that I wanted to say, for the modern world. So Jung, one of the fundamental views on the archetypes for Jung is that he says that all our concepts, all our rational products, all our discoveries, scientific discoveries, they absolutely all of them come from an archetype. There is always an archetype behind it. So you sort of cannot escape, as far as I understand, you sort of cannot escape the structure. As long as, you know, we are living in this world of conventional reality. And I completely agree with you. What was apparently completely numinous for the Renaissance people, when they discovered this infinite, when they discovered when this wall was broken through for them, and they were as if they were seeing the altar of the divine through these openings in this wall, which also are ubiquitous through Renaissance, the 3 windows usually in the wall, but then artists play a little bit with them, but the usual structure is these 3 windows. So this unfolded what I call bimandala, that preserves the vertical one, but also has, as if the vertical one sort of fell over, and it is this unfolded spatial structure now. It is very quickly becomes simply projective geometry. Desargues, right? The name of the gentleman who sort of invented the projective geometry. It's not an invention, of course. It's sort of following through with the structure that unfolded, but it is emptied of the numinous meaning. We see the beginning of the structure in Aristotle, where it is already, he talks about the infinite big body, which has this 6 directions. So it was already there. And to my understanding, I do feel that this painting of Raphael is true, the School of Athens, where Plato is pointing up and Aristotle is pointing down. So in Plato, we have the structure, but it's the anima mundi. It's the living being. It's the living foundation of the universe, the collective soul, in other words. But in Aristotle, he said, oh, no, it doesn't, it has nothing to do with the soul. It's just directions in the space. It's all, it's not alive, it's not numinous. Let's be scientific. So then later it is picked up by scientists. We see this in Descartes too, the same structure, which is becoming rationalized, and it's literalized, and then it's what we have the empty form. We don't have a living essence in it anymore, as we did have in Plato. So I really feel very strongly that in my work, where I speak of Renaissance, for instance, I want to bring back the numinous, the experience of numinous. I want to re-enchant art history. As we're talking about re-enchanting so much, art history is one of the disciplines that did not live through this revolution that, for instance, physics experienced, developing quantum physics. So art history is basically back there, where everything is very rational. And there is no numinous dimension, unfortunately, in modern art history. At least I'm not aware of one. And I really feel very strongly about the need to re-enchant art history. And this is, it feels to me that this is the way, when you bring this structure out of the artworks, and you know that the structure is numinous itself. It's the symbol of the self for Jung.
Yeah, so beautiful and really, really important work. Thank you so much. Is there any other questions that you two want to?
Yes, but maybe we don't have time, right?
I want to
we can stay here like hours.
Thank you so much. I think that what you just said, that's what I was missing growing up. I mean, I grew up in an art family too, just missing the numinous in the art. So I mean, I have to go anyway, but I want to leave on that note and just hold that in my heart. I really appreciate your work. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. Without you, nothing would happen. You made it happen. So I'm extremely grateful for all of you, for all the input, for all the emotion that I felt through this. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, thank
You're
you.
amazing.
Well, yeah, thank you, Olena. And we will see you. We'll see you again. I mean, we have a podcast coming out as well, so the conversation continues in that form. But we'll thanks again. We'll see you around.
Thank you, Jonathan, so much for everything, for organizing and for saving the day with the images.
Glad to help always. Yeah.
All right. Have a
Okay.
beautiful evening, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
I know, it's like 4 hours later there.
Thank you.